Yeah.
In prison, you live for that moment. You live for day to day.
One of the funniest stories I heard, Suge had an apartment full of producers. I guess they wasn't coming up with the right songs. And he gathered them all up and said, look, either y'all start producing some hits or I'm gonna start producing some.
He got caught with guns, and each time it's nothing. They're not gonna violate him. Because for the street guys know what I'm talking about. There's no puzzle. I mean, if you get a guy that constantly getting in trouble and never gonna come to prison, that's because he's an informant. He's a rat, a snitch, you know. And they're more important to the police on the streets than in here, because they let them know what's going on.
Suge Knight is not doing good at all behind those walls. Word just leaked that he was attacked, and the whispers say it's all connected to the explosive confessions he's been spilling on his new prison podcast. The timing is too crazy to ignore, and people are asking if Suge finally poked the wrong beast. For months now, chatter on the streets and across socials has been boiling with one rumor: Suge Knight got jumped inside. We're talking about the same Suge who once had rappers, execs, and bodyguards trembling the second he walked in a room. Back in his heyday, Suge wasn't no paper pusher. He was the man who controlled the spotlight, the one who made or broke careers with just a call. And now, that same heavyweight is struggling to keep his head above water in prison. When he got handed his latest sentence, Suge was already moving funny, always looking over his shoulder, always on guard. In court, he even told the judge straight up that his life would be in danger once locked away. Most folks brushed it off, thought he was just running his mouth, but those warnings look real different now. People are connecting the dots, saying Suge knew from the jump that enemies were lying in wait. This ain't just about prison beefs either. Insiders are hinting that what he's been revealing on his podcast could have struck nerves way too deep. If that's true, this attack wasn't random at all. It was a message. And suddenly, everything Suge said before about fearing for his safety sounds less like paranoia and more like prophecy. To really get what's happening with Suge right now, you gotta rewind and see how this storm even started. Suge Knight wasn't just some lucky cat who stumbled into the music game. He was straight out the streets, and he brought that same raw survival code into the industry. While other execs were talking contracts and handshakes, Suge was talking respect, loyalty, and consequences. This wasn't no hobby for him. This was life or death, and everybody knew it. Death Row Records under Suge's iron fist wasn't just a label, it was a movement that had the whole culture shook. This was the house that pushed Dr. Dre into superstardom, gave the world Snoop Dogg, and unleashed Tupac Shakur at his most untouchable. These weren't just artists dropping albums, they were making history, sparking movements, and flipping the balance of power in hip-hop. And the man orchestrating all of it, Suge Knight, the enforcer turned executive who made sure nobody ever forgot his name. But here's the twist. The same muscle that built his empire also set him up for downfall. For years, the whispers never stopped. Suge was accused of stacking his team with gang ties, using force when words weren't enough, and treating the music industry like a street corner hustle. These weren't stories about polite boardroom deals. These were tales of intimidation, fists flying, and folks being checked on sight if they crossed the line. The legends about Suge's tactics spread like wildfire in hip-hop circles. And while some feared him, others admired the way he forced an entire industry to respect him. But that street-style business model, it built a dynasty, and it also built a long list of enemies. And those enemies didn't just vanish when Suge went behind bars. Whispers about Suge's power moves weren't just barbershop chatter, they became hip-hop folklore. People swore he dangled Vanilla Ice over a balcony until the man coughed up his royalties. Others say his war with Puff Daddy and Bad Boy Records ran so deep, it poured gasoline on the East Coast versus West Coast fire that ended up taking Pac and Biggie from the world. These weren't bedtime stories. These were the type of tales that had industry heavyweights thinking twice before crossing death row. But the myth of Suge Knight was always tangled with the reality of courtrooms and handcuffs. His dance with the legal system started way back in 1987 with domestic violence charges. And from there, it snowballed into probation violations, assault cases, and more courtroom drama than most rappers put in their rhymes. The message from the system was loud and clear. They were not letting Suge slide. Every time his name popped up in headlines, it wasn't just about business beef. It was about how things always spiraled way past words. In 1992, Suge found himself in a case that showed just how messy it could get. He pleaded no contest after an altercation at a Hollywood recording studio and got slapped with probation. That one ruling didn't just stain his record, it set the tone for everything that followed. A shadow that haunted him at every step. The truth is, Suge never lived in the world of boardrooms and polite conversations. His conflicts had a way of spilling over, into fists, into violence, into war. And as much as that built his legend, it also painted a target on his back, a target that's clearly followed him straight into prison. The moment that really sealed Suge's fate went down on January 25th, outside Tam's Burgers in Compton. And this wasn't just another scuffle. This one ended with blood on the pavement and a life lost. Prosecutors say Suge intentionally ran over two men, Terry Carter and Clee Bone Sloan, after an argument exploded. Carter didn't make it, Sloan was left injured, and suddenly Suge wasn't just the feared boss of hip-hop anymore. He was staring down a murder case. The drama reportedly sparked from behind-the-scenes beef about the Straight Outta Compton movie. Word is, Suge was furious about being iced out of meetings, mad that his story was being told without him at the table. Prosecutors painted him as vengeful and reckless, while Suge claimed he was just defending himself, saying he got ambushed, panicked, and hit the gas before things turned deadly. His version? He was trying to escape danger. But then came the footage. That cold, grainy surveillance video that flipped the narrative upside down. Instead of a desperate man trying to flee, it showed what looked like Suge deliberately mowing those men down. That tape hit the courtroom like a bomb, and it was hard for anyone to look at Suge as the victim after that. The case dragged on for years with Suge rotting in county jail, fighting tooth and nail while his health fell apart. And while he was stuck behind bars, the empire he once ruled, death row, slipped away piece by piece, leaving behind nothing but lawsuits, betrayals, and memories of a dynasty that had already turned to dust. While Suge was stuck in county, whispers started flooding the streets about what was really happening behind bars. Some claimed he was getting pressed by other inmates, constantly targeted and struggling to keep himself safe. The once feared boss of death row was now fighting battles just to survive the day-to-day grind of lockup. By September 2018, it was time to face the music. Suge Knight finally entered a plea, no contest. That deal didn't just cover the hit-and-run case, but also other charges hanging over his head, including robbery and making violent threats against the Straight Outta Compton director. But here's where it went left real quick. Because of Suge's priors from 1987 and 1992, what should have been an 11-year manslaughter sentence ballooned into something monstrous. The judge hit him with the doubling rule, stacking it to 22 years. Then came 6 more years under California's third strike law. And as if that wasn't enough, they slapped another year for using his truck as a deadly weapon. Final calculation, a brutal 28 years in state prison with no shot at parole until October 2034, when Suge will be 69 years old. That's not just a sentence, that's basically a life bid in disguise. The vibe inside that courtroom was heavy. Terry Carter's family stood tall, facing Suge directly, unleashing all their pain and fury. They told him straight up how they felt about what he did, tearing into him with words that cut deep, making it clear they didn't see him as a mogul or a legend. They saw him as the man who took their loved one. And in that moment, the aura of Suge Knight, the untouchable kingpin of hip-hop, cracked wide open for the world to see. You could see it in Suge's face, the weight of it all crashing down as reality set in. This wasn't just another case, another bid. This was the one that might keep him locked up for the rest of his life. When they led him away to start his time at R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, the whispers started instantly. How was Suge Knight, the same man who once ran Death Row Records like a fortress, gonna survive in a place where outside power don't count for much? Prison is its own world, and inside those walls, there are wolves who would love nothing more than to test the man who claimed to be the most feared boss in hip-hop. Out there, Suge had bodyguards, cars, money, and power. In here, he was just another number in the system. That transformation wasn't just a change of address. It was like watching a dynasty collapse in slow motion, the empire he built stripped away piece by piece. Suge went from controlling platinum-selling artists and shaping hip-hop history to having guards decide when he could eat, sleep, or even breathe fresh air. The fall was brutal, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. He wasn't calling shots anymore. He was living by prison rules, and those rules were cold. As the months rolled on, one question started to circle heavier than all the rest. Not if Suge could finish out his sentence, but if he could survive it in one piece. Because behind those walls, it wasn't about music, fame, or power. It was about survival, and Suge Knight had just stepped into the deadliest stage of his life. When Suge Knight stepped through those gates at R.J. Donovan, it hit him harder than anything he'd ever faced. This was the man who spent decades with people snapping to attention the second he gave an order. A boss who could make or break careers with one call, now reduced to just another number stamped into the California Department of Correction system. That kind of fall from power? That's the type of culture shock that rattles even the hardest men. The days of rolling up in luxury cars, dripping in jewels, and surrounding himself with hip-hop's biggest names were gone. No more late-night parties, no more aura of fear that kept grown men second-guessing before even looking his way. Instead, it was stripped-down reality. Count time, chow time, and lights out when the guards decided. Not when Suge felt like it. That was his new reality, and there was no escaping it. What made Suge's prison chapter so wild wasn't just that he was a celebrity inmate, it was that his reputation followed him through those gates like a shadow he couldn't shake. See, unlike other famous names who can sometimes blend in, Suge's history carried heavy weight long before the bars closed behind him. He wasn't just known, he was infamous. And that put him in a dangerous spot. Because inside prison, a name that loud doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it paints a target on your back. That kind of reputation doesn't just vanish at the gate, it races through the prison system like wildfire. From the moment Suge hit R.J. Donovan, stories started flying about what he was facing inside. Inmates whispered about clashes with rivals, threats from gang sets that never forgot his street ties, and all the tension that comes with being a high-profile name in a cage full of wolves. But when you peel back the layers, the story gets even darker. One of the few things that's been consistently reported and backed up, Suge's health has been slipping hard since the day he got locked up. This is the same man who once walked into rooms like a tank, built like a bouncer, with a voice that made people freeze. Now, he's dealing with medical problems that stripped away that edge and exposed a side of Suge most people never thought they'd see. Vulnerable. The decline didn't creep up slowly. It hit fast. Word is Suge dropped serious weight inside, falling from over 350 pounds to around 315. And let's be real, that ain't no fitness plan. That's your body throwing warning signs. Suge himself claimed it came from untreated injuries, poor medical care, no insulin for his diabetes, and just the overall brutal prison conditions dragging him down. So instead of being the intimidating giant everyone remembered, Suge became a man fighting two battles, one against enemies inside those walls, and another against his own body breaking down on him. And that combination, that's exactly what made him a target in a place where weakness is never forgiven. The alarms really started blaring when Suge had to be rushed to the hospital for blood clots back in 2017. He blamed it on being locked in solitary too long, with no real medical care to keep him stable. And let's be real, blood clots aren't some minor jailhouse complaint. That's life or death stuff. It was a clear sign his body was breaking down under the pressure of prison life, and the system wasn't in any rush to save him. That's where Suge's prison experience gets fascinating and dangerous. His past reputation is a double-edged sword. On one side, police have long tied him to the Mob Peru set, an affiliation dating back before 2008. That kind of street connection can bring some level of protection when you walk into a prison yard full of politics. But here's the catch. The same ties also put a target on his back for every rival crew and every enemy waiting to settle a score from the death row days. Inside those walls, everything runs on politics, and Suge's position was messy from the start. His celebrity status made him high value. Some inmates saw him as an opportunity to boost their own name by testing him. Others still carried old grudges and wanted revenge. And to top it off, Suge's history of using violence and intimidation meant he couldn't just coast on reputation. Because in prison, reputation gets checked daily, sometimes violently. One of the realest glimpses into how Suge was coping came from a prison sit-down where he actually dropped gems on the system. He painted a raw picture of how twisted the prison game is, talking about the traps, the politics, and the constant tests a man faces when he's inside. He even aimed that message at younger cats still in the streets, warning them that if they kept chasing the same path, they'd end up in his shoes. That interview wasn't just Suge telling his story, it was a rare moment where you could see him reflecting, almost trying to rewrite how people see his legacy. But even then, you could feel it between the lines. Suge knew the walls were closing in and survival wasn't guaranteed.
A lot of kids saying they get their input off of rap music or rap artists or entertainment. I think some of that could be true, but most of it, I would like them to understand that basically all the artists who's involved, and if they get in trouble, these guys have record companies back that will get them high-powered lawyers.
That right there shows Suge ain't clueless. He knows exactly how the system plays the game. He's been blunt about how cats from the hood get treated way different than celebrities with stacks of cash and deep connections. His warning was simple. Don't think just because your favorite rapper beat a case, you're gonna get that same miracle if you get jammed up. The system don't move like that, and Suge learned it the hardest way possible. And he's also been loud about one of the rawest topics in both street life and prison politics, snitching. Suge's comments on cooperation with law enforcement peeled back the curtain on how the code really works and why breaking it can mark you for life inside those walls. It's a glimpse into how he's trying to walk a fine line in prison, protecting himself, dodging further attacks, and still holding on to the code that built his name in the first place. What's wild is how Suge's prison run mirrors the struggles of other high-profile inmates who thought their fame would shield them. Just like Suge, names like R. Kelly and Bill Cosby found out quick that celebrity doesn't buy you safety inside. Both of them faced headlines about attacks, harassment, and humiliations while locked up. Proof that prison is the great equalizer. For Suge, that reality hit even harder because unlike those other names, his legend was built on fear and dominance. And inside prison, those same traits can make you either untouchable or the biggest target on the yard. For Suge, the storm hitting him isn't just about enemies on the yard. It's the weight of everything stacked against him. His health is fading, he's staring down a 28-year stretch, and the psychological grind of waking up every day behind bars is eating at him. The same man who once controlled the most feared label in hip-hop is now fighting a losing war with time itself. And make no mistake, Suge has tried to fight back through the courts. He and his legal team have been swinging appeal after appeal, arguing that his conviction was flawed from the start. In 2023, Suge claimed his rights were violated, saying he was blocked from representing himself and that his lawyers were incompetent. But when the judges looked at it, they shut him down, saying his petitions were late and lacked merit. That move slammed the door on one of his biggest chances at freedom. By March 2025, the blow got even heavier. Judge Laura F. Privers straight up denied his writ of habeas corpus, calling it untimely and insincere. In courtroom terms, that was the nail in the coffin. Translation, Suge Knight ain't walking out of prison early. He's locked in until 2034 at the very least, when he'll be 69 years old, a lifetime away from the powerhouse figure he used to be. That reality has sunk in hard. The appeals are done, the doors are closing, and Suge is left to face his bid head on. And here's the part that makes it dangerous. This isn't just about time. Suge's past, the street ties, the death row wars, the enemies he made across decades, all of that is still alive. And prison walls don't erase grudges. If anything, they bring them closer. And for Suge Knight, that's the chilling reality. Surviving years behind bars while knowing there are people on the inside who would love to see him broken, or worse. So the burning question now is this: what really lies ahead for Suge Knight behind bars? Because the dangers around him aren't just rumors. They're unpredictable, and they're deadly. Let's keep it real. Prison isn't just about doing time. It's about survival. And Suge, in his own words, has been one of the few to pull back the curtain on what really goes down inside. In interviews and statements, he's laid it bare. Safety in prison ain't guaranteed, and reputation alone won't save you. Suge has admitted that prison life is a constant balancing act, knowing who to avoid, when to stand firm, and how to keep your guard up every second of the day. He's been honest about the brutal truth. Either you adapt or you end up a target. And from what he shared, it's clear that even a figure as feared as Suge Knight is feeling that pressure heavy. That's what makes these recent attack claims so disturbing. Suge's name has always carried an expectation of violence. Back in the streets, in the industry, and now inside the pen. And that same aura that once kept people in check might now be what draws danger straight to him. Because when your reputation is built on being untouchable, there's always somebody ready to test it. Now, with whispers of Suge already being pressed and even attacked behind those walls, the uncertainty grows. Will he be able to survive years in this pressure cooker? Or is prison life slowly breaking down one of hip-hop's most feared OGs in real time? Suge Knight has always been one of the most controversial names in hip-hop. Not just for the music, but for the way he ran his empire. He didn't just negotiate deals, he weaponized fear. Intimidation and the threat of violence weren't side effects of his business style. They were the business model. And that ruthless strategy carved him a reputation that left an entire industry walking on eggshells around him. That aura of danger only grew bigger as Suge became a central figure in some of hip-hop's most dramatic and deadly beefs. His name has been tied, fairly or not, to the murders of both Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. He's never been formally charged in either case, but the theories surrounding those deaths never died down. Instead, they became part of the Suge Knight legend, whispered in barbershops, dissected in documentaries, and debated every time a new book or interview dropped. One of the most explosive claims came in Murder Rap by Greg Kading, who alleged Suge orchestrated Biggie's killing by hiring Wardell Poochie Faust to carry it out. Suge, of course, has always denied having anything to do with it, but the speculation refuses to fade. And that's the thing about Suge Knight. Even when the empire collapsed, even when the money dried up, his name stayed alive in the streets because of those dark rumors. For years, Suge's myth has been just as powerful as his reality. And inside prison, that myth still haunts him. Because when your name is tied to violence at the highest level, the weight of that reputation follows you everywhere, even when you're locked inside. The web of rumors around Suge doesn't stop with him. Murder Rap even alleged that associates tied to Bad Boy Records put up money for a bounty on Tupac's head. That's the type of claim that's kept Suge's name tangled in conspiracy theories for decades, with his legacy forever tied to hip-hop's darkest chapters. But Suge's controversies weren't just about East Coast versus West Coast. He had battles at home too, and one of the most famous was with Dr. Dre, his former right-hand man. Back in the early 90s, Suge helped Dre escape Ruthless Records and build Death Row into a monster. Together, they dropped classics like The Chronic, an album that shook the industry and cemented Death Row as the most feared powerhouse in rap. But power changes people, and soon their partnership cracked. Dre couldn't stomach the chaos that came with Suge's leadership. The fights, the street energy spilling into the business, and Suge's growing bond with Tupac that seemed to encourage more drama in the game. By 1996, Dre had seen enough. He walked away to launch Aftermath Entertainment, leaving Suge furious and betrayed. Suge didn't just let him go, though. He lashed out publicly, calling Dre a traitor and clowning him in interviews. Pac, who was riding with Suge heavy at the time, even took shots at Dre on tracks like Toss It Up and To Live and Die in LA. That beef split Death Row in half, tearing down the foundation of what they had built together. And while Dre walked away to a new empire, Suge doubled down by waging an even bigger war with another East Coast mogul, Sean Diddy Combs. The tension between Suge and Diddy became one of the most dangerous rivalries of the 1990s. Suge accused Diddy of fueling the East Coast versus West Coast fire that was burning through hip-hop. Even worse, Suge believed that Biggie himself, Diddy's crown jewel, had ties to the infamous 1994 shooting of Tupac in New York. With that kind of history, it's no wonder Suge's name still carries danger like a shadow. The grudges, the beefs, the betrayals, none of that disappeared just because he got locked up. If anything, it made him an even bigger target once he landed inside. The drama exploded in 1995 when Suge stepped on stage at the Source Awards and dropped one of the coldest disses in hip-hop history. Pointing straight at Diddy's habit of dancing in his artist videos, Suge threw shade in front of the entire industry, igniting a fire that poured gasoline on the East Coast versus West Coast feud. That single moment stamped Suge as the villain to some and the ultimate shot caller to others. But the chaos didn't stop at Bad Boy. Suge even turned on his own team, and one of the biggest rifts was with Snoop Dogg. At first, Snoop was Death Row's golden child. His Doggy Style album became a West Coast classic and made him one of rap's most important voices. But when Pac was killed and Suge got locked up for parole violations, the cracks inside Death Row widened. Snoop felt Suge was suffocating him, trying to control his every move, and worse, he no longer felt safe under Suge's shadow. By 1998, Snoop made his escape, signing with Master P's No Limit Records. That move shattered Suge's pride, and he lashed out with venom. In interviews, in courtrooms, wherever he could, Suge branded Snoop a traitor, even accusing him of being a snitch working with the police. Snoop clapped back in his own music, firing off raw lines and calling Suge out directly, refusing to bow down to the man who once ruled his career. This back and forth was more than rap beef. It showed just how far Suge had fallen from the throne. His empire was built on intimidation, fear, and control. But those same tactics made him enemies everywhere he turned. By the time Death Row collapsed, Suge wasn't just a mogul with rivals. He was a marked man in both the streets and the industry. And now, decades later, that long list of enemies may be catching up to him inside prison. Because when a man's whole legacy is built on fear, there will always be people lining up to test it, especially when he's no longer the unstoppable force he once was. And let's not forget the infamous Vanilla Ice story, one of the earliest glimpses into how Suge Knight moved before Death Row even took over the game. According to Vanilla Ice himself, Suge and his crew rolled up on him at a hotel demanding the rights to Ice Ice Baby. Vanilla Ice claimed Suge even threatened to throw him off a balcony unless he signed those papers. Suge has always denied the balcony part, but the legend stuck. And that tale became one of hip-hop's most chilling urban myths.
To a hotel in LA. I walk in the room, pull the key out, and I look in there and Suge's already in the room with about 5 other guys. And I'm like, whoa.
That incident set the tone for the empire Suge would later build. An empire rooted not just in music, but in intimidation, control, and the fear he could put into anyone standing in his way. But here's the truth. When you build a life on fear, you build just as many enemies as you do allies. And for Suge Knight, that list of enemies is long, bitter, and still breathing, both in the industry and out on the streets. Prison was supposed to be the end of all that outside drama, but for someone like Suge, there's no escape. Those old grudges don't vanish when the gates close. They follow you inside, sometimes more dangerous than ever. And now, with reports of Suge being attacked behind bars, it feels like the consequences of decades of beef, betrayals, and intimidation have finally come crashing back to haunt him. One of hip-hop's most feared moguls has gone from ruling the industry with an iron fist to fighting just to make it out of prison alive. Suge's enemies aren't just ex-artists or bitter business partners. His beef runs way deeper. Many of the people who can't stand Suge are tied to gangs, rival record labels, and industry power players with connections stretching from street corners to corporate offices. That's the part most folks overlook. Some of those ties still carry weight even inside prison, meaning Suge's past moves could be putting him in the crosshairs of enemies who haven't forgotten a thing. And beyond the street politics, Suge's money troubles tell another story of weakness that stripped away his armor. Back in 2005, a court hit him with a $107 million judgment in favor of Lydia Harris, who claimed she was unfairly pushed out of Death Row Records. By the very next year, Death Row was officially bankrupt, and Suge was personally buried under $137 million in debt. That kind of financial collapse didn't just end his empire. It ripped away the resources that once gave him security, muscle, and influence. Without money, Suge lost one of the biggest shields that kept enemies in check. In prison, that matters more than people realize, because when you can't buy protection or favors, you're left standing on your own reputation. And while Suge's name still carries weight, it might not be enough when you're trapped in a system where reputations get tested every single day. Over the years, Suge's own reflections about prison life have revealed a man who knows the game better than most. He's spoken about mistakes, about violence, and about survival, almost like he's warning others not to walk the same path. But there's a haunting edge to his words. Like even he knows that the codes he once used to control others may not be enough to save him now.
I knew I was going to have to pay a debt to society before it's come to prison, because if you come from the inner city, you come from the ghetto, and you act up off that block, you'll come to prison sooner or later.
At this point, Suge Knight isn't just living through time served. He's stuck in a battlefield where his old feuds, lost fortune, and declining power collide. What should have been just a prison sentence has turned into something darker. A constant fight for survival in a place where old enemies never die, and every day could bring a new score to settle. At the end of the day, Suge Knight's story is bigger than just one man doing time. It's the unraveling of a legend who once ruled hip-hop with fear and power, now reduced to fighting for survival in a cell. From Vanilla Ice to Dre, from Pac to Puffy, from Snoop to every rival he ever crossed, Suge's empire left behind a trail of broken ties and enemies waiting for payback. And inside prison, those ghosts don't stay quiet. They come back louder than ever. Now add in his declining health, his failed appeals, his lost fortune, and the whispers about attacks tied to what he's been revealing on his prison podcast, and you've got a perfect storm. The same man who once had the entire rap game in a chokehold is now learning the harshest truth of all. Behind bars, none of that power matters. Not the name, not the legend, not the fear. Inside, Suge Knight is just another man who can be tested, and that's exactly what's happening. So where does this leave him? With years still left on his bid, enemies circling, and no real protection beyond his name, the question isn't if Suge will make it to 2034, it's whether he'll make it there alive. His saga proves that no amount of fame, power, or fear can protect you forever. Not in the streets, and definitely not in prison. And you already know, this is just the beginning of what's about to come out. Stay tapped in with BarzBuzz, because when the next piece of Suge Knight's story breaks, you'll hear it here first.